You are Locked On Cougs, your daily podcast on the Houston Cougars, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Park Ranger Locked On Coogs here, and I know that everyone was a little shocked when they heard the news on Monday, but also not like unpleasantly shocked. We kind of knew something like this would eventually happen, but the Houston Cougar men's basketball roster is going to be shifting this off season. Quannas White, spending 8 years here as an assistant after having coached a few other programs beforehand, played for Kelvin back at Oklahoma, was on that Final Four team in 2002. Quannas White has accepted a head coaching job at the University of Louisiana, formerly Louisiana Lafayette, the Ragin Cajuns, and frankly, the Louisiana native makes a ton of sense. He's going to do fantastic there. A great spot for him to get his feet wet as a head coach. I would not be surprised if he moves up quickly into like bigger and bigger things, bigger programs, etc. I also know, though, that loyalty and regionality and staying close to home is important to him. And so I don't know how far away from Louisiana he's going to want to be. Quannas gets the head coaching job there. I don't know contracts and that kind of stuff. I think the biggest thing for Houston Cougar fans to understand about this was, one, Quannas has turned down other head coaching jobs in the past. He got promoted to his official title was the associate to the head coach, or associate head coach at Houston, meaning he is like 1B behind Kelvin there right now. He also, for its worth, has publicly stated over and over and over again he's going to finish the season and finish the job here at Houston before he even goes to Louisiana, right? And I think a lot of people, I got tweets about it, I got comments about it. I'm sure, people are, every single person involved are wondering, like, does this mean there will be a distraction for the Houston Cougars? And I can sufficiently say no. And I think I know to say no for a lot of fronts. One, Quannas understands the thing at hand for him as a coach. As a coach moving to Louisiana Ragin Cajuns, there will be a long time potential between the next time he is out with a team like this and right now, right? Kelvin, Kellen, Hollis, I'm not saying that they think it's going to happen every year. They obviously understand the moment and the kind of team they got on their hands, but they've also built this program to where, like, hey, this will probably be Houston's third consecutive year as a 1 seed in the NCAA tournament. Hey, back-to-back Big 12 champs by multiple games, et cetera, right? Quannas is moving to a program that is not quite that, to say the least, right? They fired the coach in December. That Louisiana's got to rebuild, and he's going to go do it very well, but they got time. He understands that he needs to do this now because who knows whenever it happens again. Second, the other thing for Quannas that he understands as well as anyone is part of his resume in recruiting kids in the transfer portal and recruiting kids in 2025 and 2026 to Louisiana will be what they do this March. He understands that winning this March is as important for that job as anything else he could be doing, right? He wants to go get recruits. He can get recruits all over the state of Louisiana, but if he shows up with a Final Four ring, championship hat, I was, oh yeah, sorry, I had to go to a parade. I'm sorry I'm late, right? That goes a lot farther than anything else he's going to sell to that kid looking to Louisiana, right? And I say that to say that he ain't dumb, man. He understands why that's so significant. He understands why that's going to be a big deal for the Ragin Cajuns. And I have zero concern with Quannas looking ahead, getting ready to move, etc. Quannas is here, dialed in with the Cougs, and he has every reason to be for now. And frankly, even if he were thinking about that next job, it would still benefit him more to be dialed into the here and now and worry about that later, because this here and now will make that later easier. And he gets it as much as anyone. A lot of people worried about the replacement for Quannas. A big part about what Quannas did when he showed up to Houston was bring the perspective of a high-level player, he and Hollis Price both, that played for Kelvin at the peak of the Sampson system in Oklahoma. And I looked at high and low for some guys I think could do this. Now, Ebby Erie, I think, kind of fits that mold. He was the third guard on that Oklahoma team that went to the Final Four. played internationally for a long time. Like I think just finished playing internationally in 2018 after finishing Oklahoma in 2002. He's from Tulsa, but played for the Nigerian national team. I can't find if he's still involved with basketball, but could be an interesting guy to call up as a coach. Jason Dietrich was an impactful guard on the same team. He was young on that team, but he just recently stopped playing in Europe. Still very close to the game. If he's looking to get into coaching, could see him joining the staff as well. There are two names, though, that really, really intrigue me for guys to replace Quannas White in that role, and a very similar way to play that role as far as having played for Kelvin, done some coaching, or stayed involved with basketball. And the first is a guy named Eddie Hill. Eddie Hill is the associate head coach at UC Riverside, so it's the same role at Riverside that Quannas just occupied at Houston. Eddie played for Kelvin at Washington State way back in the day and was part of the great rebuild of that program then. He was a senior the year they got to the NCAA tournament, which was kind of like the first time they got in a tournament in a long time there at Wazoo. And, you know, I understand the thing like Washington State, it's a long way away. UC Riverside is a long way away. Before taking, I guess it was the South Dakota job the year before the Riverside job. But before taking the one-year job at South Dakota, he was a high up in DFW's Pro Skills EYBL program, the director of their 17U team for 3 or 4 years. He dabbled some in coaching in the business world prior to that. He was on some college staffs before that in Portland and stuff like that. But that was kind of the meat of his coaching credential before getting the job at San Diego State, and has been a high riser, very quick riser as well. Again, the guy's not necessarily young, but once he got in the college game, then in 2020, he's kind of shot up ranks very quickly at these smaller institutions, and he's still like very, I mean, you go to social media, Eddie Hill, he'll post about Kelvin all the time, still very big, like remembers his roots in that way. Having done stuff in Texas, his kids are both also in Texas. He's got one that is playing basketball at St. Edwards in Austin. One's a journalism student at North Texas and DFW in the Metroplex. Eddie himself was a 41% three-point shooter back in 94. That's kind of impressive. You go back to how they played back then. His last year was the year went to the Final Four. He was like their leading point man in a bunch of important games. He's an impactful player on those teams, so he can do the same kind of relationship kind of stuff that Quannas did as far as like, hey, I understand what it's like to be a great player for Kelvin. Let me talk your ear off. Let's talk about this a little bit, right? He can kind of direct guards in that way. For what it's worth, Silk Wave Media is like a coaching outlet that looks like coaching across the country. It's kind of a relatively new group. They named him to their list of rising stars in college basketball last year. Really, really impressive resume for a young guy. And again, he knows Kelvin played for Kelvin a long time ago. Kelvin doesn't forget names and faces. I'd imagine that's one that gets a phone call. Kelvin likes to keep things in-house. He's talked before about having the mentality of if he's not going to hire guys that played for him, why should anyone else? That's why he's got a staff built of guys that played for him, his son, Hollis, Quannas before now, right, et cetera. My second name I'm intrigued by, hear me out here, is actually a guy that is not done playing yet, but I think it's going to be done really soon. And that's Eric Gordon. Eric Gordon played for the Houston Rockets for a minute. Really enjoyed his time in Houston with them. If you ever hear him talk about it, things went south and that whole coaching shift happened or whatever. But before that, he enjoyed his time in Houston. He played at Indiana. He was a one and done at Indiana. And he was at least the best recruit that Sampson had at Indiana ever. He might have been the best ranked recruit, depending on what ranking you're looking at, that Sampson ever had, period. Was Mr. Basketball instead of Indiana, etc. But he really connects with Houston after having lived here. And in doing a quick amount of digging, right, did not take long to figure out that like there are all kinds of articles out about Eric Gordon having a strong relationship with Kelvin and having, frankly, like said on the record at different points, he kind of feels like Indiana did Kelvin wrong, right? If you don't know, Kelvin got asked to leave Indiana in February of his final year there. Some recruiting deal where he was using phones or something, make a bunch of phone calls, stuff that is not illegal now, right? And Eric Gordon has said on the record, like, hey, I think that was a really strict, stern punishment for something that, like, you know, the phones deal wasn't that big a deal, right? And frankly, it kind of feels like he sided with Kelvin in that breakup. I don't think it's any accident that Eric Gordon went one and done. Now, he would have been a top whatever pick and all that, but like, he just certainly wasn't going to come back for year 2 and play for somebody else, right? That team with Eric and Kelvin was 17-1 before Kelvin was asked to go, very out of nowhere. But Eric, being so well connected with Kelvin, I think could also do the deal where, hey, understands the high-end player perspective. They work some of the same kind of pro stuff. And Eric's first couple of years in Houston were kind of towards the end of what Kelvin was doing at the Rockets. They both know each other, having lived in Houston as well. That overlap of that was going on. And frankly, for what it's worth, if Eric wanted to get into coaching after retiring, he's like 36 going on 37. It would be he might not have the same high up of a role as Quannas did, but I do think there's something to be said about the fact that he could come in and take that some position on staff and kind of have that same player relationship as a guy that played with Kelvin. Others would maybe not be able to have. The other thing I would say about Eric, and this will be where I wrap up the segment, so we're going a little long, is that he's a recent enough NBA name that I think he'll carry some level of respect with recruits and stuff like that. I think it's worth mentioning that's going to be really, really important as well. Now, I want to talk about the other big news today and Monday with the Big 12 awards coming out. And I think Houston only got hosed on one of them.